Certain moments etch themselves onto the soul, defining the contours of an entire lifetime. For me, that indelible instant arrived precisely as the old church clock tower chimed noon, the heavy bronze bell tolling not just the hour, but the devastating realization that the man I loved, the man I was moments away from marrying, simply wasn't coming. What remained unknowable then, amidst the wreckage of that perfect June day, was that this single act of abandonment, this public humiliation, would merely serve as the brutal prologue to a far more intricate, more profound narrative than my 21-year-old heart could possibly have conceived. My name is Eleanor Rose Thompson, and at 82 years of age, I reside still in the small, familiar wooden house my parents bequeathed me, nestled in the quiet town of Millfield, Ohio. The same house where I raised my adopted daughter, Sarah, entirely on my own. To the neighbors, I am simply Grandma Ellie, the kindly widow known for her perpetually stocked cookie jar and readily offered, gently phrased advice to anyone navigating life's inevitable tribulations. Few, however, possess any inkling of the profound sorrow, the staggering betrayal, and the unexpected triumphs that have sculpted the long arc of my existence. Before I unspool the threads of this deeply personal history, might I ask for your quiet presence? Perhaps share in the comments the city or country from which you are listening today. And if this is your first encounter with my recollections, please consider subscribing to the channel and offering this video a thumbs up. Your engagement helps these true accounts of struggle and resilience reach a wider audience. Knowing my words resonate, knowing someone is truly listening after decades of carrying the story largely in silence, offers immeasurable strength. Now, allow me to transport you back to that pivotal, sun-drenched day in the summer of 1964. It was June 12th, a date forever imprinted upon my memory with crystalline clarity. The sky arched above Millfield in the most flawless shade of cerulean blue, adorned only by a scattering of wispy cotton candy clouds, precisely the idyllic backdrop every young bride envisions for her wedding day. I was 21, brimming with the effervescent hopes and naive dreams characteristic of youth, poised on the threshold of marrying Richard Miller, universally acknowledged as the most handsome, most sought-after young man in all of Lawrence County. Our courtship had been the stuff of local legend, high school sweethearts, whose romance endured through his military service overseas. Upon his return, he proposed formally, presenting me with a delicate, modest diamond ring, an heirloom passed down from his grandmother. That morning, I awoke in the familiar floral, wallpapered confines of my childhood bedroom, enveloped by the excited chatter of my 3 bridesmaids, my younger sister, Judy, and my 2 dearest lifelong friends, Margaret and Dorothy. My mother had devoted weeks to meticulously hand-sewing my wedding gown, an exquisite creation of heavy satin and intricate lace, its elegance punctuated by a long row of tiny, pearl buttons cascading down the back. Securing each delicate button had consumed nearly an hour of painstaking effort, yet when I finally stood before the tall cheval mirror, the reflection gazing back felt ethereal, transformed, a princess momentarily sprung from the pages of a cherished fairy tale. "Oh, Eleanor," my mother breathed, her eyes misting with sentimental tears as she carefully positioned my grandmother's antique lace veil upon my head. "You are undeniably the most beautiful bride this town has ever witnessed." My father stood silently in the doorway, his usual stoicism momentarily fractured by an uncharacteristic glisten in his eyes. A man of few outward emotional displays, his quiet presence that morning spoke volumes. The ceremony was scheduled for high noon at the historic First Baptist Church, the same venerable sanctuary where generations of my ancestors had exchanged their vows. By 10:30, our modest home buzzed with cheerful chaos. Neighboring women arrived bearing covered dishes, laden with potluck contributions for the reception planned in our backyard: potato salad, fried chicken, Jell-O molds shimmering in the sunlight. The entire town seemed personally invested in the celebration. Such was the nature of small communities in that era. A wedding wasn't merely a private affair. It represented a communal affirmation, a shared milestone. At precisely 11:15, my father's meticulously polished old Chevrolet, adorned with festive white ribbons, stood ready at the curb to transport me to the church. My bridesmaids, radiant in their matching pastel blue dresses, climbed carefully into another vehicle driven by my mother, arranging their skirts meticulously to avoid wrinkling. Dad and I were scheduled to follow shortly. "You still possess time to reconsider, Ellie," Dad murmured quietly as we stood alone for a final moment in the familiar living room, surrounded by congratulatory cards and floral arrangements. I laughed softly, assuming it was merely one of his characteristically dry, teasing remarks. "Oh, Daddy, I love him," I replied confidently, reaching up to straighten his slightly crooked tie. "I know you believe you do, sweetheart," he responded, his voice holding an unusual gravity. "I simply desire your ultimate happiness." A fleeting shadow crossed his eyes then, an ambiguous expression I couldn't quite decipher. Only much later, in hindsight, would I question if, on some intuitive level, he had perhaps sensed a discordant note I remained blissfully deaf to. We arrived at the church precisely at 11:45. I recall glancing down at the small, elegant watch pinned delicately to my bridal bouquet. A thoughtful engagement gift from Richard. 15 minutes remaining until I officially became Mrs. Richard Miller. The church interior pulsed with warmth and anticipation, filled to capacity. Over 200 townspeople had gathered to witness our union. Peeking through the small curtained window of the antechamber where I waited with my bridesmaids, I could see the familiar wooden pews, adorned with white satin ribbons and fragrant clusters of daisies, my favorite bloom. "Has anyone laid eyes on Richard yet?" I overheard Dorothy whisper anxiously to one of the ushers stationed near the entrance. A tiny flutter of unease stirred within me, quickly suppressed. Richard's best man, Tommy Johnson, had orchestrated a small bachelor gathering the previous evening. "They likely just lost track of time," I reassured myself firmly. At 11:55, Reverend Wilson appeared at the antechamber door, his customary benevolent smile appearing slightly strained, his expression carefully neutral. "Eleanor, my dear," he began gently, "it appears the groom is experiencing a slight delay. Nothing to be concerned about, I am quite certain." But as the minutes ticked relentlessly past noon, stretching into 12:10, with absolutely no sign of Richard or his groomsmen, an audible murmur began to ripple through the assembled congregation. Tommy's young wife, her face pale with growing anxiety, slipped into the antechamber. "Tommy, he isn't at home either," she whispered frantically. "He never returned last night after the bachelor party." Outside, my father paced restlessly on the church steps, periodically scanning the length of Main Street, searching for any sign of Richard's distinctive blue Ford. My mother, ever the gracious hostess even under duress, attempted to maintain calm amongst the increasingly restless guests, offering vague excuses about potential car trouble. By 12:30, Reverend Wilson discreetly suggested we formally postpone the ceremony. "These minor setbacks occasionally occur," he offered kindly, though the genuine concern flickering in his eyes belied his placating words. This wasn't merely fashionable tardiness. Something felt profoundly wrong. At 1 o'clock, Richard's mother, Mrs. Miller, a woman known for her stoic composure, finally dissolved into unrestrained sobs in the front pew. "Something dreadful must have befallen them," she wept hysterically. "My Richard, he would never intentionally do this." Yet, as the heavy church clock laboriously struck 2 p.m., the oppressive June heat intensifying within the crowded sanctuary, the devastating truth became starkly, undeniably apparent. Whispers escalated into open speculation. Mr. Miller, Richard's father, returned grim-faced from a hasty check of Richard's bachelor apartment, reporting that several suitcases and items of clothing were conspicuously missing. Simultaneously, Tommy's distraught wife discovered their joint savings account had been completely emptied the previous afternoon. I remained seated rigidly in the small antechamber, numb, dissociated, the beautiful handcrafted wedding gown, suddenly feeling like a heavy, suffocating costume in some surreal, cruel theatrical production. My bridesmaids attempted words of comfort, offered futile reassurances, but their voices seemed distant, muffled, failing to penetrate the thick fog of disbelief enveloping me. All rational thought focused on a single, repeating loop. How could he possibly inflict this? What egregious flaw in me provoked such abandonment? Was there someone else? Finally, my father entered the room, his face a tight mask concealing barely contained fury. "Eleanor, honey," he stated quietly, his voice strained. "I believe it is time we inform everyone to return home." In that precise moment, something fundamental within me fractured. The meticulously constructed vision of my future, our cozy little house near the town park, the imagined faces of the children we would raise together, the anticipated tapestry of shared Christmas mornings and summer picnics. It all disintegrated instantaneously, crumbling like a fragile sandcastle, engulfed by an unexpected, devastating wave. Reverend Wilson ascended the pulpit, his expression somber, and made the difficult announcement. "It appears," he began, his voice heavy with regret, "that there will be no wedding ceremony conducted today. We ask that you please join us in keeping Eleanor and both families in your thoughts and prayers during this profoundly difficult time." The expressions of pity reflected in the eyes of our departing guests, as they filed slowly past the antechamber door, felt almost more unbearable than the abandonment itself. Some offered awkward, mumbled condolences, treating the situation akin to a funeral bereavement. Others, clearly uncomfortable, couldn't bring themselves to meet my gaze at all. Back at our house, my mother's friends moved with quiet efficiency, dismantling the festive reception decorations that had been hung with such joyful anticipation just hours earlier, wrapping uneaten platters of food, extinguishing the celebratory atmosphere with somber finality. Later that evening, I sat numbly on the edge of my childhood bed, still inexplicably clad in the heavy satin wedding dress, unable yet to face the symbolic act of removing it, of conceding the reality of the day's events. Sheriff Jenkins arrived at our front door, his presence confirming the unspoken dread. Richard's blue Ford had been located abandoned at the Greyhound bus station in Columbus. The ticket attendant distinctly recalled selling 2 one-way tickets to New York City the previous evening to 2 young men, matching Richard and Tommy's descriptions. They had paid in cash. "I'm truly sorry, Eleanor," Sheriff Jenkins stated gruffly, holding his hat respectfully in his hands. "It seems highly probable this was premeditated." He hesitated. "We can file a missing persons report, if you wish, but—" He didn't need to complete the sentence. There existed no legal statute against leaving a bride stranded at the altar, only the profound, unprosecutable crime committed against a trusting heart. That night, I wept until my body ached, until no tears remained, until only a hollow, racking exhaustion persisted. My mother sat patiently beside me throughout, stroking my hair with the same gentle cadence she employed when I was a small child, suffering a skinned knee or mourning a broken toy. But this wound ran far deeper, infinitely more complex, resistant to any simple kiss or comforting word. "Why, Mama?" I repeated endlessly through my choked sobs. "Why would he do this to me?" She possessed no answers. None of us did. The ensuing days dissolved into a suffocating blur of communal shame and searing personal pain. Our telephone rang incessantly, occasionally offering genuine, well-meaning expressions of support, but more frequently conveying thinly veiled curiosity, neighbors fishing for salacious details. My father, fiercely protective, finally disconnected the line entirely on the 3rd day. Leaving the perceived sanctuary of the house felt impossible. The prospect of facing the inevitable whispers, the pitying stares at Millie's diner or the Rexall drugstore, utterly unbearable. Mail continued to arrive, addressed nonchalantly to Richard Miller at our family home. An official acceptance letter from a prestigious law school located in New York City, a pursuit he had never once mentioned contemplating. A brief handwritten note from his cousin residing in Queens, referencing apartment arrangements. Disparate pieces of a hidden puzzle I hadn't realized existed began clicking ominously into place, revealing a premeditated betrayal so intricate, so calculated, it induced waves of nauseating disbelief. A week following the wedding, that never transpired, a solitary letter arrived addressed specifically to me. The postmark clearly indicated New York City. My hands trembled so violently I struggled to tear open the envelope. "Eleanor," it began, penned in Richard's familiar, slanted handwriting. "By the time you receive this message, I will have already embarked upon establishing my new life here. I offer my apologies for the pain my actions have undoubtedly caused, but I simply could not proceed with a marriage that would have inevitably trapped both of us within the suffocating confines of that small town forever. I sincerely hope, someday, you might come to understand that I ultimately undertook this difficult action for the benefit of us both." It was signed simply, Richard. Not love, Richard. No expression of regret for the promises broken. No acknowledgement of the future stolen. Not even a proper farewell. Just a self-serving, cowardly justification that ultimately explained nothing, offered no solace. With a surge of newfound, cleansing anger, I carried the letter into the kitchen, struck a match, and held the flame to its edge, watching impassively as the paper curled, blackened, his carefully crafted words dissolving into ash within the porcelain basin of the sink. That small act of destruction felt strangely empowering, the first conscious decision made by the nascent new Eleanor. The woman unexpectedly forced to construct an entirely new existence from the smoldering ruins of the life so cruelly, abruptly stolen from her. I possessed no foresight then, no inkling that 15 long years would elapse before Richard Miller re-entered my life. No premonition of the shocking, complex truth he would eventually reveal upon his return. And certainly no comprehension that the greatest test of my resilience, my character, lay still far ahead, awaiting the moment I would be forced to decide whether extending forgiveness to the man who had shattered my heart on what should have been the happiest day of my life was even conceivable, let alone possible. But standing there in my mother's quiet kitchen that afternoon, watching the final embers of his letter fade to gray, I silently vowed, this devastating blow will not define me. This betrayal will not destroy me. Somehow, someway, I will find the inner strength required to persevere, to move forward. I simply had no earthly idea, yet, how to begin. The summer of 1964 unfolded as a slow, agonizing crawl through grief's suffocating landscape. While my peers embraced the season's carefree rituals, sun-drenched beach excursions, laughter-filled evenings at the local drive-in theater, I remained largely sequestered within the familiar, yet suddenly claustrophobic, walls of my parents' home. The pervasive whispers, the inescapable, pitying glances exchanged by neighbors whenever I dared venture outdoors, felt like physical blows, reinforcing my sense of shame and isolation. Millfield, the town where I had spent my entire life, its population barely cresting 3,000 souls, abruptly felt suffocatingly small, each street corner, shop window, and church, pew saturated with poignant, painful memories of Richard and the future we were supposed to share. "Eleanor, you cannot remain hidden indefinitely," my mother stated firmly, one sweltering August morning, decisively pulling open my bedroom curtains, flooding the room with bright sunlight I had been deliberately shunning. "Mrs. Willis from the elementary school telephoned earlier. They require a new school secretary urgently, and she immediately thought of you." I continued staring blankly at the ceiling, unmoved by the prospect. I had completed secretarial training the previous year, envisioning a brief stint working before settling into domestic life with Richard. Now the thought of assuming a public-facing position, enduring the daily scrutiny, the inevitable sympathetic inquiries from poor Eleanor, the jilted bride, felt utterly unbearable. "I am not ready, Mama," I murmured. She perched on the edge of my bed, her expression a mixture of stern resolve and maternal love. "You will never feel entirely ready, child, if you perpetually await that feeling's arrival. Sometimes," she advised pragmatically, "one must simply undertake the action first, and the necessary readiness materializes in the doing." 2 days later, propelled more by her gentle insistence than any internal motivation, I found myself seated behind the worn oak desk in the Millfield Elementary School office, mechanically typing enrollment forms, answering the incessantly ringing telephone with a brittle, forced cheerfulness that likely deceived no one. The initial week proved excruciating. Parents arriving to register their children for the upcoming school year would perform visible double takes upon recognizing me, their expressions rapidly shifting from surprise to that suffocating, unwanted sympathy I had come to loathe. "Just meet their gaze directly, Eleanor," advised Mrs. Willis, the school's formidable, no-nonsense principal, who had offered me the position despite, or perhaps charitably, because of my recent notoriety. People tend to forget their own intrusive curiosity when confronted with quiet dignity. Gradually, painstakingly, I began to establish a semblance of a new routine. Rising at 6:30, sharing a mostly silent breakfast with my parents, immersing myself in the administrative tasks of the school day from 8 until 4, returning home for dinner, followed by long, empty evenings, filled primarily with reading or watching television while my mother knitted silently and my father remained engrossed in his newspaper. It wasn't truly living, not in the vibrant sense I had once anticipated, but it represented a form of functional existence, a way to mark the passage of time. Autumn arrived, transforming the surrounding Ohio hills into a breathtaking tapestry of crimson and gold. Accompanying the seasonal shift came the unexpected news. Tommy Johnson, Richard's best friend and accomplice in abandonment, had returned to Millfield, alone. He reportedly reappeared at his parents' doorstep one rain-soaked evening, looking thin, haggard, his ambitious New York City adventure having evidently imploded. "He's been asking about you, Ellie," my sister, Judy, informed me cautiously one Sunday following church service. "Claims he needs to speak with you regarding Richard. I have absolutely nothing to discuss with either of them," I retorted, my voice sharper, colder than I intended. But Tommy proved persistent. He intercepted me outside the school building one afternoon. As I departed for the day, his once handsome features now gaunt, his eyes possessing a haunted, hollow quality. "5 minutes, Ellie. Please, that's all I ask." Against my better judgment, swayed perhaps by a lingering curiosity or a subconscious need for closure, I agreed to meet him briefly at Drexel's Diner, the most public, brightly lit venue I could conceive. If his purpose was merely to convey Richard's belated apologies, I preferred witnesses. "He isn't returning, Ellie," Tommy stated bluntly, without preamble, stirring his untouched cup of coffee with obsessive repetition. "He married someone else, some young woman from a wealthy New York family. Her father secured his admission into Columbia Law School." The information struck with the force of a physical blow, despite its predictability. Of course, Richard had landed advantageously. Men like him invariably did. "Her family possesses significant connections," Tommy elaborated, his voice flat, resigned. "They're arranging a position for him at her uncle's prestigious law firm upon his graduation. He's thriving. And you? Will?" I inquired, surprised by the question forming on my own lips. "Why did you return?" Tommy emitted a short, hollow laugh. Turns out I wasn't suited for the relentless pace of the big city. Or perhaps, he amended wryly, the big city wasn't particularly suited for me. My funds depleted rapidly. Finding decent employment proved impossible. "And Richard?" He shrugged dismissively. His affluent new life apparently held no space for inconvenient old friends from rural Ohio. I should have felt a sense of vindication, perhaps even satisfaction, witnessing Tommy's diminished state. Instead, I felt only a profound, weary sadness. "Why are you relaying all this to me, Tommy?" "Because I am genuinely sorry, Ellie," he stated, his voice cracking slightly. "Deeply sorry for my part in helping him execute that plan. Sorry for the immense pain we inflicted upon you." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "And also, because Richard specifically requested I ascertain if you had managed to get over him yet, if you had moved on with your life." The sheer audacity of it. Richard, comfortably ensconced in his new life, dispatching his discarded friend to gauge the lingering impact of his betrayal, ignited something within me. Not the remnants of love, not even simmering hatred. Instead, a sudden fierce surge of protective determination, a resolve that had lain dormant for months. I rose abruptly from the booth, meeting his gaze directly. "You relay this message back to Richard," I instructed, my voice low but clear, unwavering. Inform him that Eleanor Watson does not waste her precious time contemplating cowards who abandon their commitments under the cover of darkness. Tell him, I added, leaning slightly closer, that I sincerely wish him and his new wife every ounce of happiness they undoubtedly deserve. I turned and walked out of the diner, head held high, leaving Tommy staring blankly into his swirling coffee cup. Something fundamental had shifted within me during that brief, unexpected encounter. It wasn't complete healing, not yet, but it felt like the first decisive, empowering step taken on that long, arduous path. That winter proved exceptionally brutal, the coldest Ohio had experienced in decades. Pipes burst throughout Millfield, schools closed intermittently, and neighbors diligently checked on elderly residents as temperatures plummeted far below zero. In January 1965, a devastating ice storm encased the town in a glittering, treacherous sheath, leaving many households, including ours, without electrical power for nearly a week. My parents and I took in our elderly next-door neighbors, the Harrises, whose own home had become dangerously cold. Mr. Harris suffered from a pre-existing heart condition, and the stress induced by the storm, compounded by the frigid temperatures, triggered a severe cardiac episode. As he lay pale and gasping on our living room sofa, struggling for each precious breath, I realized with sudden clarity that I represented his only immediate hope. The roads remained impassable, coated in thick, slick ice, and the telephone lines were down throughout the county. Bundling myself in every available layer of warm clothing, I ventured out into the biting wind and treacherous conditions, determined to reach Dr. Peterson's residence 3 blocks away. The journey, typically a brisk 10-minute walk, stretched into nearly an hour of slow, arduous progress, battling biting winds and treacherous footing. When I finally managed to summon the doctor and guide him back to our house, he unequivocally credited my swift action with saving Mr. Harris's life. "You possess remarkable grit, Eleanor," Dr. Peterson remarked afterward, warming his hands by our fireplace. "Have you ever contemplated pursuing a career in nursing? The hospital over in Athens is initiating a new training program this coming spring." I hadn't. My future considerations had remained largely arrested, frozen, at the moment of Richard's abandonment. But his suggestion planted a seed. Assisting the Harrises, acting decisively in a crisis, had provided the first genuine sense of purpose, of efficacy, I had experienced in months. When spring finally arrived, thawing the frozen landscape, I enrolled in the nursing program, committing to the daily 20-mile commute to Athens. My parents, though somewhat surprised by my choice, no one in our family had previously pursued a medical profession, offered their quiet support. "I am proud of you, Ellie," my father stated simply one evening. Coming from him, a man notoriously sparing with praise, those words held immense significance. Nursing school proved intensely demanding, consuming my time and energy in ways I hadn't anticipated. The intricate complexities of the human body, its remarkable resilience juxtaposed against its inherent vulnerability, became my central focus. Immersed in learning anatomy, mastering procedures like dressing wounds and administering medications, providing comfort to patients facing illness or death, there remained little mental space for dwelling on past heartbreaks or indulging in self-pity. For the first time since Richard's departure, entire days passed without his memory intruding upon my thoughts. By 1967, I successfully completed my training, earning my nursing credentials, and promptly secured a position at Athens Memorial Hospital, assigned, ironically perhaps, to the maternity ward, the abandoned bride now tasked with assisting new life entering the world. Yet, I discovered unexpected healing within that role. Each newborn cry, each tiny, perfect face, each newly formed family embarking upon their journey together, served to subtly mend the fractured pieces within my own heart. I rented a small, sparsely furnished apartment near the hospital, relishing the profound sense of independence, fiercely proud of supporting myself entirely through my own labor. My mother occasionally expressed concern regarding my solitary living arrangement. "A young woman requires protection, Eleanor," she'd fret during phone calls. But I found unexpected strength, resilience in that solitude. My nursing shifts were often long, emotionally taxing, physically draining, yet imbued with a sense of profound purpose I had never previously imagined my life could hold. The world outside Millfield continued its tumultuous evolution. Nightly news broadcasts delivered stark images from the escalating war in Vietnam, showcased impassioned civil rights protests, documented cultural shifts that felt utterly removed from the structured, predictable rhythm of my days filled with hospital rounds and patient charts. Yet, even our relatively isolated corner of southeastern Ohio could not remain entirely insulated from the era's upheavals. In late 1968, Athens Memorial began receiving its first casualties evacuated directly from Vietnam, local young men returning home, bearing physical and psychological wounds too complex for overburdened military hospitals to manage adequately. Their broken bodies, their haunted thousand-yard stares affected me deeply. I found myself volunteering for additional shifts on the designated veterans ward, drawn inexplicably towards their palpable suffering, perhaps recognizing a shared experience of trauma, of futures irrevocably altered. "You possess a unique rapport with these young men, Eleanor," Dr. Matthews observed one evening, as I patiently coaxed a withdrawn soldier, barely older than I had been on my ill-fated wedding day, to consume a few spoonfuls of broth. "They seem to respond positively to your presence." "Perhaps," I replied thoughtfully, surprising myself with the candor. "I understand something of what it feels like when the future you implicitly counted upon simply vanishes without warning." Dr. Matthews, James, gradually became a trusted friend during those long, emotionally charged nights on the ward. A decade my senior, divorced, profoundly dedicated to his medical practice, almost to the exclusion of personal life, he offered quiet companionship. We shared lukewarm coffee during brief breaks, occasionally grabbed a hasty meal together in the hospital cafeteria following exhausting shifts. He never pressed for intimacy beyond friendship, a respectful boundary I deeply appreciated, given the protective walls I had unconsciously erected around my heart. "Have you ever considered what comes next, Eleanor?" he inquired one stormy night, as we stood together watching lightning illuminate the distant hills through the large cafeteria windows. "After the initial hurt begins to fade?" I considered his question seriously for a moment. "I believe this is what comes next, James," I answered finally, gesturing towards the hospital wing behind us. "This demanding work, these patients requiring care, that feels like enough right now." I offered a small shrug. "Honestly, it's considerably more purpose than I envisioned possessing 4 years ago." The spring of 1969 brought sudden, devastating tragedy to the Millfield community. A school bus, returning from a field trip, tragically crashed into the rain-swollen Hooper Creek during an unexpected flash flood. Athens Memorial immediately implemented its mass casualty protocol, mobilizing every available staff member as ambulances began arriving, delivering injured, terrified children and their chaperones. I worked for 36 consecutive hours without rest, moving numbly from patient to patient, operating within a fog of profound exhaustion fueled only by adrenaline and professional determination. Among the most critically injured survivors was 10-year-old Sarah Collins, a small, dark-haired girl whose quiet resilience immediately captured my attention. She had tragically lost both parents in a car accident the previous year and was currently residing under the care of her elderly, frail grandmother. The bus crash inflicted upon Sarah a severely fractured leg, significant internal injuries, and ultimately rendered her completely orphaned when her grandmother suffered a fatal heart attack upon receiving the devastating news of the accident. Sarah's plight, her compounded trauma, resonated deeply within me. During my infrequent breaks, I found myself drawn to her bedside, reading stories aloud, gently combing tangles from her dark hair, offering quiet companionship. What will happen to me now?" she asked one afternoon, her voice small, fragile, filled with heartbreaking uncertainty. I had no immediate answer. "The State Child Services will ensure she is placed in a good home," the assigned social worker later assured me privately. However, Given her age and existing medical needs, finding a permanent placement might take considerable time. Temporary foster care is the most likely initial outcome. The thought of this fragile, profoundly traumatized child navigating the impersonal, often overburdened foster care system struck me as unconscionably cruel. Without conscious premeditation, without fully weighing the immense implications, I heard myself utter the words that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my life. What if? What if I took her in? Just temporarily, of course, until she fully recovers. The process proved neither simple nor swift. As an unmarried woman residing in small-town Ohio in 1969, my suitability as even a temporary guardian faced significant scrutiny. Yet, paradoxically, the act of advocating fiercely for Sarah, navigating the bureaucratic hurdles, ignited a dormant fierceness within me, a protective, maternal instinct I hadn't realized I possessed. "You've never even raised a child, Eleanor," my mother protested during a concerned phone call upon learning of my intentions. "And your small apartment is hardly adequate. I will relocate," I stated with unwavering certainty. "And I will learn quickly." By autumn, I had moved into a small, affordable rental house situated conveniently near the elementary school Sarah would eventually attend, and temporary guardianship was officially granted. Sarah's recovery progressed slowly. Her physical injuries gradually healed, but the emotional trauma of her multiple losses lingered profoundly. Nightmares frequently shattered her sleep. Phantom pains radiated from her mended leg, hindering her participation in physical activities when she finally returned to school. Yet, amidst the challenges, we slowly, cautiously began constructing a shared routine, establishing fragile bonds of trust. "How long will I be permitted to stay with you, Miss Watson?" she inquired one evening as I assisted her with spelling homework at the kitchen table. "For as long as you need to, sweetheart," I replied, keeping my tone deliberately casual, concealing the burgeoning hope within me that temporary might eventually evolve into permanent. The formal adoption process spanned nearly 2 arduous years, involving intrusive home studies, multiple court appearances, and persistent scrutiny regarding my fitness as a single parent. The social worker assigned to our case maintained initial skepticism. "You yourself have experienced significant past trauma, Miss Watson," she observed pointedly during one of her home visits. "Are you entirely certain you possess the necessary emotional resources to effectively raise a child who has also endured profound trauma?" "I believe," I countered respectfully but firmly, "that I am perhaps uniquely equipped precisely because I understand the nature of trauma from first-hand experience, and more importantly because I know, definitively, that healing and rebuilding are possible afterward." In May of 1971, the adoption decree was finalized. Sarah Watson, no longer Collins, officially became my daughter in the eyes of the law, though she had irrevocably claimed that sacred space within my heart long before the paperwork was signed. The small courtroom overflowed with supportive witnesses, my aging parents, beaming with pride, hospital colleagues, even Mrs. Willis, Sarah's elementary school principal. "Well done, Eleanor," James murmured, squeezing my arm gently as we celebrated afterward during a small, informal gathering at my house. "You've managed to cultivate something truly beautiful from considerable pain." Sarah's presence irrevocably transformed my life, enriching it in ways I could never have anticipated. Through her school activities and friendships, I gradually formed connections with other parents. The lingering whispers characterizing me as poor Eleanor, the jilted bride, gradually faded from communal memory, replaced by new identifiers. Sarah's mom, Nurse Watson. The subsequent years unfolded according to the familiar, comforting rhythm of raising a child. Attending school concerts and science fairs, navigating the complexities of first crushes and inevitable teenage rebellions. I continued my fulfilling work at the hospital, eventually earning promotion to head nurse of the maternity ward. My friendship with James deepened into a steady, supportive companionship, occasionally hinting at the potential for something more romantic, though neither of us seemed quite ready or willing to risk altering the comfortable dynamic we had established. By 1979, Sarah had blossomed into a bright, compassionate young woman of 20, successfully navigating her sophomore year of college, pursuing a degree in education, aspiring to become a teacher herself. My parents had both passed away peacefully several years prior, leaving me their house in Millfield. Though I retained ownership, renting it out, I preferred remaining in Athens, in the small house where Sarah and I had forged our unique family. Life had settled into a predictable, satisfying pattern. Purposeful work, the joys and challenges of motherhood, the comfort of established friendships. It wasn't perhaps the wildly exciting existence I might have once dreamed of as a naive young woman, but it felt fundamentally good, solid, earned. And then, on a dreary, rain-swept April afternoon, returning home after a particularly demanding shift at the hospital, I discovered him seated stoically on my front porch steps, older, grayer, lines of weariness etched around his eyes, yet unmistakably Richard Miller. 15 years after vanishing without a trace from our wedding day, the man who had irrevocably broken my heart had reappeared in Millfield. And with his return, he carried a devastating truth, destined to shake the very foundations of the life I had so painstakingly, carefully rebuilt in his absence. I stood immobilized at the base of my driveway, the steady April rain plastering my nurse's uniform uncomfortably against my skin, the forgotten umbrella dangling uselessly from my hand. 15 years. A chasm of time. He had changed, certainly. Silver threads now prominent in his once uniformly dark hair, lines of experience etched around his eyes. Yet the core essence remained undeniably Richard Miller. The boy who had captivated my young heart, the man whose abrupt departure had fundamentally reshaped the trajectory of my existence, now sat hunched on my porch steps, his expensive suit absorbing the relentless downpour. "Hello, Eleanor," he stated quietly, as he rose slowly, stiffly, as if his body carried the weight of those intervening years. His voice, deeper now, possessed a polished, unfamiliar cadence, the accent of New York's educated elite having long supplanted his native Ohio drawl. A tumultuous cascade of emotions surged through me. Shock, certainly, residual anger, undoubtedly, a flicker of unwelcome curiosity, yet beneath it all, surprisingly, a profound, anchoring sense of calm. Countless times, particularly during those raw early years, I had mentally rehearsed this potential encounter, composing scathing, witty speeches designed to lacerate him with remorse. Now, confronted with the actual moment, standing drenched, water dripping from my hair into my eyes, I felt only a dull astonishment at my own composure. "You're trespassing, Richard," I stated flatly, walking past him without breaking stride, unlocking my front door. I stepped inside, leaving the door pointedly ajar. Not quite an invitation, yet an ingrained politeness I couldn't entirely suppress prevented me from slamming it shut in his face. He followed hesitantly into the small, familiar living room. His gaze swept across the modest furnishings, lingered on the scattered evidence of Sarah's recent college visit, textbooks piled on the coffee table, nursing journals stacked beside them, before settling on the framed photographs displayed prominently on the mantel. Sarah captured at various stages from infancy through her high school graduation. A recent Christmas snapshot capturing the two of us, laughing together beside the decorated tree. "Your daughter?" he inquired, gesturing towards the photos, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes," I confirmed tersely, offering no further elaboration. Whatever motives propelled his unexpected reappearance, after 15 years of absolute silence, he hadn't earned the privilege of entering Sarah's story. I retreated to the kitchen, the familiar grounding ritual of preparing coffee, providing a necessary anchor. Methodically measuring grounds, filling the percolator, setting it on the stove. The simple actions steadied my trembling hands, offered something tangible to focus upon, besides the ghost from my past, now occupying my living room. "You appear well, Eleanor," he offered as I returned bearing 2 steaming mugs. I emitted a short, humorless laugh. "Why are you here, Richard? Surely you didn't journey all this distance merely to comment upon my appearance." He accepted the proffered mug, but didn't drink, instead cradling it between his palms, as if seeking its physical warmth. Outside, The rain intensified, drumming a relentless tattoo against the window panes. "My wife, Judith. She passed away," he stated abruptly, the words stark in the quiet room. "Cancer, 3 months ago. I am sorry for your loss," I responded automatically. The well-worn phrase uttered countless times to grieving families at the hospital over the years. And surprisingly, I was sorry. Sorry that anyone, even him, should endure that particular species of pain. "We shared a good marriage," he continued, his gaze distant. 15 years, no children. She was exceptionally kind, far better than I deserved. I waited silently, sensing this preamble led towards a larger, more significant revelation. Richard had always possessed a certain theatrical flair, a penchant for building suspense before delivering crucial information. During her final weeks, when she knew the end was near, she extracted a promise from me. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine directly across the small space. "She made me vow I would seek you out, Eleanor. That I would finally make things right. There is nothing requiring making right," I stated coolly, though my heart began to beat faster. "What transpired is long past. We both moved forward, constructed separate lives." "That assertion," he countered softly, his voice dropping almost to a whisper, "is not entirely accurate, Eleanor. I haven't been truthful with you regarding the true reasons for my departure." A part of me, the part that had painstakingly built a resilient life upon the narrative of his simple cowardice, wanted desperately to silence him, to preserve the version of events I had long ago accepted. That explanation, while agonizing, felt comprehensible, manageable. Yet, another part, the seasoned nurse trained to confront difficult truths, the mother who had instilled in Sarah the paramount importance of honesty, recognized the necessity of hearing whatever painful revelation Richard had carried back to Millfield. "Continue?" I instructed quietly. Richard placed his untouched coffee mug carefully onto the table and reached for the worn leather briefcase he had carried inside. From within, he withdrew a thick, aged manila envelope, its edges softened, corners frayed, suggesting frequent handling over many years. 2 days prior to our scheduled wedding," he began, his voice low, strained. "This envelope was delivered to my apartment. Hand-delivered by a man I didn't recognize, someone who identified himself only as an employee of Jonathan Pearson." The name struck me with the force of a physical blow. Jonathan Pearson. Millfield's undisputed titan, owner of the sprawling textile mill that served as the town's primary employer, my own father included. A man renowned for his ruthless business acumen and equally predatory personal reputation. With fingers that suddenly felt numb, clumsy, I accepted the proffered envelope, slid out its contents. Grainy, black and white photographs. Compromising images depicting a young woman, vaguely resembling my mother in her youth, engaged in intimate acts with a much older man, clearly Pearson himself. The woman's face, though partially obscured in some shots, bore a disturbing likeness. "There were approximately 50 additional photographs," Richard stated quietly, his gaze averted as I stared in horror at the explicit images. "Along with these," he indicated a sheaf of documents also contained within the envelope. Financial records, bank statements, meticulously detailing years of alleged embezzlement from the Pearson textile mill, purportedly perpetrated by my father. "Pearson's messenger," Richard continued, his voice flat, devoid of emotion now, articulated the terms explicitly. "If I proceeded with our marriage, these photographs and financial documents would be immediately released publicly. Your father would face certain imprisonment. Your mother's reputation, her standing within the community, would be irrevocably destroyed." My mind reeled, struggling to reconcile the accusations with my lifelong perception of my parents. My father, painstakingly honest, meticulously accounting for every penny, an embezzler. My mother, prim, proper, deeply religious, who considered even square dancing somewhat risque, involved in a clandestine affair with the town's most notorious womanizer. It felt utterly impossible, ludicrously absurd. This is a lie, I whispered, shoving the envelope back across the table as if it were contaminated. A vicious, cruel fabrication. Richard shook his head slowly, weariness etched deep into his features. That was my initial reaction as well. I confronted Pearson directly the following day, threatened to expose his blackmail attempt to the authorities. He sighed heavily. He merely laughed in my face, Eleanor, reminded me he effectively owned half the county's law enforcement. Then, Richard paused, swallowing hard. He presented further evidence, more detailed financial records correspondence, documents bearing what appeared to be your parents' genuine signatures. It seemed, I demanded, the question exploding from me. Why would Pearson orchestrate such an elaborate, destructive scheme? Richard's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching near his temple. Because, he explained grimly, I had repeatedly refused to sell him my grandfather's undeveloped land, the 100 acres bordering his existing mill property. He desperately coveted that land for expansion, and I represented the sole obstacle preventing it. He presented me with an ultimatum: relinquish you in the land, or witness your family's utter annihilation. The disparate pieces clicked into place then. My father's abrupt, unexplained retirement from the mill shortly after our cancelled wedding. My mother's subsequent withdrawal from church activities, her increasing reclusiveness, their eventual seemingly sudden decision to relocate to Arizona in 1966, citing vague health reasons, where they resided quietly until their deaths years later. You could have confided in me, Richard, I accused, anger finally surging through the shock. We could have faced Pearson together somehow. Pearson explicitly forbade it, Richard countered immediately. He warned that if I alerted you or your parents, he would unleash everything instantly. I possessed less than 48 hours to make an impossible decision. His voice cracked with remembered anguish. I convinced myself I was acting nobly, protecting you, that a clean, albeit brutal, break was preferable to subjecting you and your family to public ruin, imprisonment, lifelong disgrace. He couldn't meet my eyes. So, you fled. With Tommy. Richard nodded miserably. Tommy, he was never intended to be involved. He discovered me packing frantically, demanded an explanation. When I confessed the situation, he insisted upon accompanying me, swore he couldn't remain in Millfield, couldn't face you daily, knowing the truth, and the letter. I pressed, recalling the cold, self-serving words that had inflicted such lasting pain. The dismissive excuses about not wanting to be trapped in a small town. Pearson dictated the content. Richard admitted shamefully. Claimed it would solidify your anger towards me, facilitate a cleaner separation. His laugh held no trace of amusement, only profound bitterness. Regarding that aspect, at least, he proved correct. An immense silence descended between us again, thick with the weight of 15 years of divergent lives, shaped irrevocably by decisions made under duress, fueled by deceit. Outside, the rain had finally ceased, leaving only the gentle, rhythmic dripping of water from the porch eaves. Why reveal this now, Richard? I asked finally, the question hanging heavy in the still air. After all this time, why return with this devastating truth? Because Jonathan Pearson is deceased, he stated simply. Suffered a massive stroke 6 weeks ago. Richard leaned forward intently. And also, because Judith, on her deathbed, made me promise, not just to seek you out, but to finally tell you the complete truth. His voice faltered momentarily. She insisted no one should be forced to navigate their entire existence believing they were fundamentally insufficient, when the actual truth originated from external manipulation, from circumstances entirely beyond their control. I stood abruptly, needing physical distance, needing movement to process the seismic shift occurring within me. My entire adult life, the narrative I had constructed around Richard's abandonment, the resilience I had cultivated in its aftermath, all suddenly felt predicated upon shifting, treacherous sand. If Richard's actions stemmed from a misguided attempt at protection, rather than personal rejection, what did that revelation signify about the woman I had become in response? Eleanor, there is one final piece, Richard stated quietly from behind me. I turned back slowly, bracing myself, wondering what further revelation could possibly follow. After Pearson's death, he continued, retrieving another, newer envelope from his briefcase. I gained access to his private office, searched through his confidential files. I discovered this. He slid the second envelope across the table. Inside, photographic negatives, expert analyses, sworn affidavits. The photographs of your mother? They were composites, cleverly staged using professional models, their faces digitally altered. Sophisticated work for that era, but demonstrably fake. And the financial documents implicating your father? Equally elaborate forgeries? Expertly crafted, yes, but definitively fraudulent. I sank back heavily into my chair, the room seeming to momentarily spin around me. What are you saying? Your parents, Richard stated clearly, his voice filled with profound regret, were entirely innocent of all accusations. Pearson fabricated the entire scenario, every piece of evidence, solely to manipulate me into relinquishing the land. 15 years. 15 years of believing a lie, of building a life around a phantom rejection. 15 years shaped by a powerful man's ruthless greed and a frightened young man's coerced choice. Get out, I whispered, the words barely audible, deadly quiet. Eleanor, please, get out! I screamed then, the raw force of the command tearing at my throat, unleashing decades of suppressed pain. 15 years, Richard. 15 years I lived believing I wasn't worthy, believing something was so fundamentally flawed within me that the man I loved, the man I was about to marry, couldn't even grant me the basic decency of a face-to-face farewell. He rose unsteadily, gathering his briefcase with trembling hands, his own face ashen with shared trauma. I'll leave the envelopes, he offered quietly. All of it, the proof. You deserve to possess the documented truth. At the front door he paused, turning back one last time. I've secured lodging at the Millfield Inn, he stated hesitantly. For the remainder of the week, if after you've had time to process, if you find you wish to speak further. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, I collapsed onto the sofa, my mind reeling, utterly overwhelmed. The very foundation upon which I had constructed my adult identity, the narrative of abandonment, the subsequent journey towards self-reliance and strength, suddenly felt destabilized, built upon quicksand. If Richard hadn't rejected me, but had instead been tragically manipulated into believing he was protecting me, what did that signify about the woman I had forged in the crucible of that perceived abandonment? I don't know how much time elapsed, lost in the turbulent vortex of these revelations, before the front door opened again, accompanied by Sarah's cheerful voice calling out, "Mom? Why is there a strange man sitting alone in his car outside our house, sobbing?" Sarah. My daughter. My anchor. My redemption. Whatever devastating truths Richard Miller had unearthed, whatever complexities now clouded the past, they could not diminish the most significant, most authentic reality of my present life, the remarkable young woman standing before me. The daughter whose presence had healed aspects of my soul I hadn't even known were wounded. It's a long story, sweetheart, I managed, wiping furiously at my own eyes, attempting a semblance of a smile. A very, very long story. That night, after Sarah retired to bed, I sat alone at the familiar kitchen table, the 2 manila envelopes resting before me like artifacts from a buried alternate timeline. One contained the meticulously crafted lies that had irrevocably shattered my wedding day, altering the course of my life. The other held the irrefutable proof of their fabrication. 15 years. Redirected, reshaped by calculated malice and profound deception. My thoughts drifted towards the life I hadn't lived, marriage to Richard, perhaps the 4 children we had naively planned, residing in the small house near the park we had dreamed of purchasing. Would that alternate Eleanor have discovered the strength to become a nurse? Would Sarah, my precious Sarah, somehow still have found her way into my life through different circumstances? The telephone's sudden ring jolted me from my reverie. It was nearly midnight, an unusual hour for casual call. Eleanor? James's familiar, concerned voice sounded through the receiver. Just finished a late shift at the hospital. Heard through the grapevine Richard Miller is back in town. Are you all right? The genuine warmth and worry in his tone brought fresh tears welling in my eyes. This man, this steadfast friend, represented the stable, supportive reality of my actual life. He came to see me today, James, I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. It's complicated. He explained his reasons for leaving all those years ago. Reasons I never could have possibly imagined. Do you require company? He offered immediately, without hesitation. I can be there in 20 minutes. I considered his kind offer. James had been my unwavering confidant for over a decade, a constant source of support, always respecting the emotional boundaries I maintained. No, I replied softly, but thank you, James, truly. Right now, I simply need some time alone, time to think, to process all of this. After disconnecting the call, I returned my attention to the 2 envelopes resting on the table. Then, with deliberate, almost ritualistic movements, I gathered the photographs, the forged financial documents, the affidavits proving their falsehood, the tangible remnants of a 15-year-old lie, and carried them towards the fireplace in the living room. One by one, I carefully fed the papers into the hearth, striking a match, watching as the flames greedily consumed the carefully constructed deceit, watching the lies that had profoundly shaped my existence curl, blacken, and ultimately disintegrate into fine, gray ash. The truth, I comprehended with newfound clarity, was both far simpler and infinitely more complex than the straightforward narrative of abandonment I had clung to for so long. Richard hadn't intentionally rejected me. He had been cruelly manipulated into believing his departure constituted an act of protection. My parents, while perhaps flawed in their own ways, were innocent of the specific crimes Pearson had fabricated. And I had unwittingly built a strong, fulfilling life upon the very foundation of an abandonment that was simultaneously devastatingly real in its enduring impact, yet demonstrably false in its underlying motivation. As the final document turned to embers, glowing briefly before fading into darkness, a decision quietly solidified within me. Tomorrow I would visit the Millfield Inn. Not necessarily to offer Richard forgiveness. The concept felt premature, perhaps even unattainable, for 15 years of lost time, lost possibilities. But rather, to seek deeper understanding. To hear the complete, unvarnished story from his perspective. To learn about the trajectory of the young man I had once loved enough to stand beside at an altar. And perhaps, within that shared understanding, within that complex, painful truth, I might discover a pathway towards reconciling the resilient woman I had become with the hopeful young woman I might have been, recognizing, finally, that they were not entirely separate entities, but rather intrinsically connected facets of the same enduring spirit. The Millfield Inn retained its faded, genteel charm, seemingly untouched by the passage of 15 years. The same slightly worn burgundy carpet muffled footsteps in the lobby. The familiar oak registration desk gleamed under its decades-long patina of polish. The distinct, faintly musty aroma of aged wood and perhaps lingering cigar smoke greeted me as I pushed through the heavy, revolving glass door. Mr. Chambers, the elderly desk clerk who had presided over the inn for as long as I could remember, recognized me instantly. "Nurse Watson, is everything all right?" His solicitous inquiry held genuine concern. In a town Millfield size, the head maternity nurse rarely visited the inn unless attending to an unwell guest. "Everything is quite well, Mr. Chambers, thank you," I reassured him. "I'm actually here to see a guest. Richard Miller. Could you please ring his room?" His thinning eyebrows shot upwards noticeably, betraying his surprise, but years of ingrained discretion prevented any overt comment. He simply nodded curtly and dialed the room extension. Small towns, I reflected wryly, possess exceptionally long, unforgiving memories, and my famously abandoned wedding remained firmly embedded within Millfield's local lore. 5 minutes later, I found myself seated across from Richard in the inn's quiet, nearly deserted tea room, a porcelain pot of Earl Grey tea cooling rapidly between us on the small table. He appeared unrested, dark circles prominent beneath his eyes, his typically immaculate attire slightly rumpled. I confess, he admitted, his voice low, hesitant. I didn't anticipate hearing from you again so soon. Or, he added with painful honesty, perhaps ever. I burned the envelopes last night, Richard, I stated directly, meeting his gaze without flinching. All of the contents. Alarm flickered briefly across his face. But the evidence, the proof? I no longer require paper proof, I replied calmly. I carried one version of the truth within me for 15 years. I have no interest in preserving another version documented solely on paper. I wrapped my hands around the delicate teacup, drawing a measure of strength from its warmth. What I desire now, I continued, my voice steady, is genuine understanding. The complete story, starting from the beginning. And so, for the subsequent 2 hours, while the late spring sun climbed higher, casting slanted rays through the tea room's tall windows, and the space gradually filled with the low hum of the luncheon crowd, Richard recounted the full harrowing narrative. He detailed the initial shock and disbelief upon receiving Pearson's ultimatum, his frantic, futile attempts to verify the authenticity of the documents within the impossibly short time frame, the insidious nature of Pearson's veiled threats extending beyond my family's reputation to encompass my own future aspiration. He possessed connections everywhere, Eleanor, Richard explained, his voice still holding echoes of the remembered fear. People in New York, influential figures. He explicitly stated that if I defied him, if I revealed his scheme, you would find yourself blacklisted, unemployable in any reputable hospital across the country. He paused, rubbing his temples wearily. He swore he could ensure no nursing school would accept your application, that your burgeoning career would be extinguished before it even began. So I clarified softly, the realization settling heavily. You truly believed you were sacrificing our future together in order to salvage mine. At that moment, yes, he confirmed, his gaze distant. I convinced myself it represented a noble act, sparing you public disgrace, protecting your potential future. A clean, albeit cruel, break seemed preferable to witnessing your family's devastation, your own dreams potentially shattered. A bitter, self-deprecating laugh escaped him. Of course, I've had 15 long years to recognize the inherent cowardice embedded within that nobility. I should have fought Pearson more tenaciously, sought alternative solutions, trusted you enough to face it together. I considered the terrified 23-year-old he had been, barely more than a boy himself, confronted by the immense power and ruthlessness of a man like Jonathan Pearson. Defying him openly would have required extraordinary courage, a level of fortitude few young men in his position likely possessed. What transpired after you reached New York? I inquired gently, prompting him forward. He recounted the subsequent years, immersing himself in the rigors of law school, financially supported by Judith's affluent family, embarking upon a demanding career within her uncle's prestigious law firm. The insidious creep of alcohol dependency during his 30s as a means of numbing the persistent nightmares, the unresolved guilt, the eventual arduous path towards recovery through therapy. Judith, she knew, he admitted quietly, his voice softening with remembered affection, knew something remained fundamentally broken within me. Approximately 5 years into our marriage, during a particularly difficult period, I finally confessed everything. About you, about Millfield, about Pearson's coercion. He paused, his expression reflecting deep gratitude. She was remarkable, Eleanor, possessed incredible compassion. She could easily have walked away, sought someone whole, undamaged. Instead, she steadfastly encouraged me towards healing, towards confronting the past. She sounds like an extraordinary woman, I offered sincerely. She truly was, he affirmed, genuine emotion, warming his voice for the first time. When she received the terminal diagnosis, one of her final requests, her insistence actually, was not merely that I finally reveal the truth to you, but that I actively seek to make amends however possible. To finally liberate myself, his voice faltered slightly, as much as liberate you from the long shadow cast by those events. As he spoke, I studied the man seated opposite me, acknowledging the profound differences between him and the earnest young man I had once loved so fiercely. Richard had undeniably attained significant external success, the lucrative career, the influential connections, the material wealth subtly conveyed by his expensive tailoring, the understated gleam of his wristwatch. Yet, an undeniable melancholy permeated his presence, a deep-seated sadness, suggesting that worldly achievements hadn't entirely filled the void left by past traumas, by choices made under duress. "Tell me about your daughter," he requested suddenly, shifting the focus, perhaps sensing my internal observations. "In the photographs you displayed, she appears genuinely happy. You both do." For the first time since commencing our conversation, a genuine, unforced smile touched my lips. "Sarah," I began, warmth flooding my voice, "is my unexpected miracle. She entered my life precisely when we both desperately needed saving." I briefly recounted the circumstances, the tragic school bus accident, Sarah's injuries and subsequent orphaning, my impulsive decision to offer temporary guardianship, the challenging yet ultimately rewarding journey towards formal adoption. "Becoming her mother," I concluded softly, "remains the single best, most fulfilling decision I have ever made." "A mother?" he repeated wonderingly, as if processing the concept fully for the first time. "I always knew, even back then, that you would be an exceptional mother, Eleanor." His simple statement, delivered with such quiet certainty, referencing the shared dreams of our youth, the 4 children we'd planned, the names we'd tentatively chosen, brought an unexpected sting of tears to my eyes. "And you?" I inquired gently, blinking rapidly to clear my vision. "You and Judith, you never had children of your own?" A shadow briefly crossed his features. "No, we were unable. Complications arising from a surgery Judith underwent during her adolescence." He twisted his wedding band absently on his finger. "We explored adoption options at one point, but the timing, it never seemed quite right. My career remained all-consuming. Then," he sighed softly, "her health began to decline." I recognized the familiar cadence of regret in his voice, the poignant sorrow associated with unexplored paths, missed opportunities, a grief that can subtly haunt even a life deemed successful by conventional standards. "What do you truly want from me now, Richard?" I asked finally, directly addressing the question that had lingered unspoken between us since his reappearance. He looked genuinely startled by the directness. "I desire nothing from you, Eleanor," he stated emphatically. "My purpose in returning was solely to provide you with the truth, not to impose any further burden upon you." "Yet you mentioned staying at the inn for a week," I prompted gently. "Why?" He hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "I suppose," he admitted thoughtfully, "I harbored a faint hope, a desire to ascertain if some form." Walking home from the inn later that afternoon, the gentle warmth of the May sunshine felt like a benevolent embrace. I replayed our conversation mentally, grappling with the complex emotions it evoked. Richard had returned seeking absolution, certainly. But could I genuinely offer it? More importantly, should I? The question resonated deeply as I prepared dinner for Sarah, lingered through our evening conversation, echoed persistently during the ensuing sleepless hours. The following morning, I made an uncharacteristic decision. I telephoned the hospital, requesting, for the first time in my long nursing career, a personal day off. Then I drove towards a destination I had consciously avoided for 15 years, the First Baptist Church, the intended site of our ill-fated wedding. Reverend Wilson had retired years ago, replaced by a younger pastor I knew only superficially. The sanctuary stood empty at that hour, sunlight streaming through the vibrant stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the familiar, worn wooden pews. I sat quietly in the back row, attempting to reconcile the crushing heartbreak of that distant June morning with the convoluted, newly revealed truth. "Nurse Watson?" The young reverend's quiet voice startled me from my reverie. "Is everything satisfactory?" "I'm uncertain, Reverend," I confessed honestly. "I find myself wrestling with the concept of forgiveness. the profoundly complicated kind. He seated himself beside me in the pew, radiating quiet empathy. This man, young enough to be my son, listened patiently as I shared the condensed version of Richard's Returne, the stunning revelations he carried. Forgiveness, Eleanor, he offered gently when I finished, is rarely about absolving the other person. Fundamentally, it represents a gift you bestow upon yourself, a conscious decision to relinquish a heavy burden you were never meant to carry indefinitely. His simple wisdom resonated as I departed the quiet sanctuary and drove, not towards home, but towards the Millfield Community Center. Richard looked surprised when I telephoned, requesting he meet me there. I need to show you something, I stated without preamble. Will you accompany me? 20 minutes later, we stood together within the community center's main hall, currently empty except for the receptionist who recognized me from previous hospital fundraising events. Why have we come here, Eleanor? Richard asked, clearly bewildered, as I led him down a long corridor adorned with framed photographs and newspaper clippings documenting the center's history. We're examining what ultimately grew from the wreckage of our canceled wedding, I replied quietly, stopping before a large framed photograph dated 1972. It depicted a younger, more serious version of myself, participating in a ribbon-cutting ceremony in front of a modest building. This, I explained, is the Millfield Free Clinic. I played a role in its establishment 8 years ago. It provides essential medical care for residents who cannot afford traditional hospital services. I guided him towards another photograph, Sarah, captured around age 16, radiating youthful idealism, surrounded by a group of younger children. This represents the Millfield Youth Support Group, I elaborated. Sarah initiated it herself, drawing upon her own experiences with loss and trauma. It has offered invaluable support to dozens of vulnerable children within our county. Systematically, patiently, I walked him through the tangible evidence of the life I had painstakingly constructed during his prolonged absence. Not merely the successful nursing career or the joys of motherhood, but the community engagement, the service initiatives I had championed, the lives I had positively impacted, endeavors fueled not despite my past pain, but arguably because of it. Do you perceive it now, Richard? I asked finally, turning to face him directly. The consequences of that long-ago day, they didn't solely shape my individual trajectory. The repercussions rippled outwards, influencing others, creating unforeseen opportunities for service, for healing. Understanding slowly dawned in his eyes. You're suggesting something positive ultimately emerged from my actions? From Pearson's deceit? I am suggesting, I clarified carefully, that life possesses complexities far exceeding simple narratives of villains and victims. What Pearson perpetrated was undeniably reprehensible. Your response, while profoundly damaging to me at the time, stemmed from human frailty. I paused, taking a deep breath, claiming my agency. But the life I subsequently built, the woman I chose to become, the positive contributions I managed to make, those choices, Richard, belong entirely to me. Not to you, not to Pearson, solely to me. We walked in contemplative silence to the small town park, situated across from the community center, settling onto a familiar wooden bench beneath the fragrant blossoms of a dogwood tree. A group of young children chased each other nearby, their joyous laughter echoing on the gentle spring breeze. I believe, Richard stated finally, breaking the silence, that I have spent 15 years subconsciously seeking absolution. From you, from myself, perhaps even from Judith, though she never explicitly blamed me. He turned towards me, his expression earnest. But witnessing all of this today, the tangible evidence of the meaningful life you've constructed, the remarkable woman you've become, I've realized something profoundly important. You didn't require my return, my explanation, to facilitate your healing. You accomplished that entirely on your own. Not entirely, I admit it honestly. A part of me always carried the wound, always wondered what inherent flaw within me could have possibly prompted you to vanish without a single word. That particular hurt, it never completely healed. There was nothing inherently flawed within you, Eleanor. He insisted passionately. his voice cracking slightly. Absolutely nothing. You represented everything genuinely good and right in my life then. Pearson recognized that intrinsic goodness. It's precisely why his threat proved so devastatingly effective. He knew I would sacrifice anything, do anything to protect you. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the park lawn, we continued our conversation, sharing aspects of our separate lives, acknowledging regrets, celebrating small joys, discussing Sarah and Judith, recognizing the individuals we had evolved into during the long years of separation. We were no longer the naive boy and girl who had planned to pledge eternal vows, but two middle-aged adults bearing the accumulated weight and wisdom of life's unpredictable storms, navigated independently. "What are your plans now, Richard?" I inquired eventually, as the shadows deepened. "Will you return to New York?" He shook his head definitively. "No. I resigned from the law firm shortly after Judith passed away, sold our apartment." A faint, tentative smile touched his lips. "Interestingly, I still retain ownership of my grandfather's undeveloped land just outside Millfield. Pearson never succeeded in acquiring it, despite his efforts." He glanced towards me, a speculative light entering his eyes. "I've been contemplating, perhaps building something there, a retreat center possibly, focused on serving veterans, perhaps troubled youth." He hesitated. If the community would even accept such an endeavor. Accept me. The idea resonated instantly, powerfully within me. The Miller Retreat Center. A place dedicated to healing, situated on the very land originally intended for our first marital home. A poignant, potent symbol of transformation. "I believe," I stated slowly, thoughtfully, "it could be precisely what Millfield requires right now. Though," I added pragmatically, "navigating the local politics, the zoning commissions, that will require assistance. Would you consider helping me?" he asked, the question hanging tentatively between us, imbued with hope yet devoid of presumption. That evening, over dinner, I recounted the entire complex saga to Sarah. The full truth regarding Richard's departure 15 years prior, his unexpected return, the devastating revelations about Pearson's manipulations, and finally, Richard's proposal for the retreat center. My brilliant, compassionate daughter listened intently, her expression thoughtful, absorbing the intricate details without interruption. "So," she stated finally, not posing a question but rather voicing an observation, "you are contemplating genuinely forgiving him, I believe." I admitted quietly, the realization solidifying even as I spoke the words, that I already have. Not primarily for his benefit, Sarah, but for my own. Carrying that immense weight of past pain, of unresolved questions, no longer serves any constructive purpose. She reached across the table, her warm hand covering mine comfortingly. "Does this signify, is there potentially something rekindling between you two, romantically?" Her direct question caught me slightly off guard. I hadn't consciously allowed my thoughts to venture into that territory. "No," I responded firmly, perhaps too quickly. "Too much time has elapsed. We are fundamentally different people now than we were then." I hesitated, then conceded, but perhaps we could eventually become friends. Professional colleagues, certainly, collaborating on the retreat center project. Sarah's perceptive eyes, so like her own father's in their quiet wisdom, seemed to see beyond my guarded response. "Mom," she began gently, "throughout all the years I've known you, you've maintained formidable walls around your heart, never allowing anyone truly close romantically. Not even James, who," she added with a fond smile, "has clearly been deeply in love with you for practically forever." "That's not is," she interrupted softly but firm. "You constructed those defenses after Richard left, understandably. They kept you safe. But perhaps," she squeezed my hand again, "perhaps now is the time to consider cautiously lowering them. Just a little." Over the subsequent 6 months, Richard and I embarked upon the collaborative process of bringing the retreat center concept to fruition. He provided the land equity and secured the primary funding, leveraging connections from his former life. I adeptly navigated the labyrinthine local bureaucracy, secured necessary permits, and contributed significantly to designing programs tailored to genuinely serve the identified community needs. We convened weekly, sometimes more frequently, diligently maintaining a strictly professional demeanor throughout our interactions, despite the inevitable curious glances and whispered speculations circulating throughout Millfield. The true story of Richard's coerced departure 15 years prior, or at least a simplified, more palatable version, gradually disseminated throughout the town. The revelation that he had been a victim of Jonathan Pearson's ruthless manipulation, rather than merely a callous deserter, dramatically shifted public perception. Pearson remained a controversial figure in local memory, even posthumously. The man previously vilified for abandoning his bride was cautiously, tentatively, welcomed back into the community fold. His proposed retreat center project came to be viewed not merely as a business venture, but as a form of communal atonement, a potential source of healing for the town itself. In November 1979, we officially broke ground for the Miller-Watson Retreat Center for Youth and Veterans. The deliberate hyphenation of our surnames on the project charter had been Richard's explicit suggestion, a public acknowledgement, he stated, of our equal partnership in the endeavor. The local newspaper covered the groundbreaking ceremony prominently, featuring a photograph of Richard and me standing side by side, smiling formally, silver-plated shovels poised to turn the first ceremonial earth on the site, destined to become a place of profound healing. "You didn't need to include my name so prominently," I remarked to him afterward as we shared coffee at Drexel's Diner, the very same establishment where, years earlier, Tommy had delivered the painful news of Richard's New York marriage. "Your name absolutely belongs there, Eleanor," he countered simply, meeting my gaze directly. "This center exists as a direct consequence of our shared history, encompassing both the painful and the redemptive aspects of it." As winter descended upon Millfield, blanketing the construction site in pristine snow, transforming the skeletal framework of the emerging buildings into a starkly beautiful landscape, a subtle yet undeniable shift occurred in the dynamic between us. Our project meetings began organically extending beyond professional discussions, transitioning into shared dinners, contemplative walks along the frozen creek banks, cautious reminiscences of shared memories. We proceeded carefully, tentatively, both bearing the scars of our respective pasts. Richard still mourning Judith's recent passing, myself inherently cautious about dismantling the emotional independence I had so fiercely cultivated. Sarah observed these developments from afar, with what seemed like amused wisdom, offering little comment, preoccupied with her final year of college and preparations for her upcoming student teaching placement. James, my steadfast friend, reacted with characteristic grace when I explained the evolving situation, expressing only genuine happiness regarding my potential second chance at companionship. "Some narratives aren't fully concluded within a single chapter, Eleanor," he remarked, his eyes twinkling with affectionate teasing. "It appears yours might possess an entirely unexpected epilogue." Christmas Eve found me presiding over an improbable, eclectic gathering within the warm confines of my small house. Sarah, home from college, radiated youthful vibrancy. James attended, accompanied by his sister, his presence a comforting affirmation of enduring friendship. Richard joined us, having recently purchased a small cottage near the retreat center property, though still temporarily residing at the Millfield Inn. Several nurses from the maternity ward, women who had become dear friends over the years, completed the circle. As conversation flowed easily around my festively decorated dining room table, bridging disparate chapters of my life, I caught Richard observing me from across the room. The expression in his eyes, a complex mixture of wonder, profound gratitude, and something deeper, more resonant, momentarily stole my breath. Later, as the evening wound down, guests gradually departing into the softly falling snow, Richard lingered, assisting me with clearing dishes despite my protests. "I have something small for you," he stated quietly, retrieving a small, elegantly wrapped package from his coat pocket. "An early Christmas gift, if you are willing to accept it." The box itself felt old, covered in faded blue velvet. Inside, Nestled on satin lining lay not a ring, as I had fleetingly, anxiously anticipated, but a delicate, antique silver locket. Upon opening it, one side revealed a miniature, skillfully rendered painting depicting the nearly completed retreat center building. The other side bore tiny, intricately engraved words, "From endings come beginnings." "It's truly beautiful, Richard," I whispered, genuinely touched by the profound thoughtfulness, the symbolic resonance of the gift. "There's one more thing," he added, producing another envelope from his pocket. Inside rested a formal invitation to the inaugural opening gala for the Miller-Watson Retreat Center, scheduled for June 12, 1980. The date struck me instantly, precisely 16 years to the day after our originally planned wedding. "Was the date chosen deliberately?" I inquired, my voice remarkably steady, despite the surge of complex emotions rising within me. "Very deliberately," he admitted softly. "I harbored the hope that perhaps we could consciously replace the painful memory of what was lost on that date with a celebration of what has ultimately been found, been created." He gently touched the silver locket, now resting against the fabric of my blouse, near my heart. "New beginnings, Eleanor." Standing there in my familiar kitchen, amidst the remnants of the festive gathering, Christmas lights twinkling warmly in the window pane, I recognized we had indeed traversed a full, improbable circle. Not to miraculously reclaim the innocent, untested love shared by two naive young people. That iteration of ourselves had vanished as surely as the intervening years, but rather to potentially forge something entirely new, something tempered by harsh experience, fortified by profound suffering, rendered infinitely more valuable, perhaps, by the immense cost incurred along the way. "Yes, Richard," I agreed simply, meeting his hopeful gaze. "I would like that very much." In the months that followed, as winter gradually yielded to the tentative greening of spring, and the retreat center neared its final stages of completion, Richard and I continued our careful, deliberate dance, professional colleagues evolving into trusted friends, navigating the tentative possibility of becoming something more. There existed no sense of urgency, no external pressure. We had both learned, through difficult experience, that life rarely adheres to predetermined timelines or neatly plotted paths. The day of the opening gala arrived, bathed in the same brilliant, cloudless June sunshine that had mocked me 16 years earlier. But this time, standing beside Richard, welcoming the Millfield community, I felt not the crushing despair of an abandoned bride, but the quiet pride of a woman fully inhabiting her own life, celebrating not a failed marriage, but a joint creation forged from shared pain and eventual understanding. Sarah, radiant in a blue dress reminiscent of the shade my long-ago bridesmaids had worn, effortlessly played the role of charming hostess, engaging potential donors and community leaders with her innate warmth and intelligence. James attended as my cherished friend, his presence a quiet affirmation of unwavering support for the new chapter unfolding before me. The Miller-Watson Retreat Center itself, embodying a design simultaneously rustic and elegantly functional, its expansive grounds meticulously landscaped, its therapeutic spaces thoughtfully appointed, surpassed even our most ambitious initial vision. As the evening festivities drew towards conclusion, Richard stepped onto the small platform erected for the occasion. A hush fell over the assembled crowd, champagne glasses poised expectantly for a final toast. 16 years ago today, he began, his voice clear, steady, though a discernible emotion resonated within it. I committed the most profound mistake of my life. A decision predicated upon fear and external manipulation resulted in deep, lasting pain inflicted upon the individual I cared for most profoundly. A low murmur rippled through the attendees. Many possessed knowledge of our intertwined history, yet hearing it acknowledged so openly, so publicly, felt unexpectedly significant. "But," he continued, his gaze finding mine across the crowded lawn, "standing here tonight, witnessing what has ultimately grown from that painful, destructive seed, this remarkable center, yes, but far more importantly, observing the extraordinary woman Eleanor became in the aftermath, acknowledging the countless lives she has positively impacted, the community she has tirelessly served. I cannot help but marvel at the improbable ways. He raised his glass high. I propose a toast to Eleanor Watson, whose remarkable capacity for resilience, for service, and ultimately for profound forgiveness made this evening, this entire endeavor, possible. And he added, encompassing the assembled guests with his gesture, to all of you who have supported her journey, and now offer your support at her journey, and now offer your support to this center. As applause swelled throughout the gathering, our eyes met and held across the intervening space. In that shared glance, I comprehended the true essence of forgiveness, not a simplistic erasure of past wrongs, but rather a conscious acknowledgement that pain, when purposefully channeled, possesses the transformative power to cultivate profound purpose. That relationships fractured seemingly beyond repair can, paradoxically, yield unexpected, beautiful fruit. That sometimes the longest, most circuitous journeys lead us not back to our original starting point, but precisely to the destination where we were always, ultimately, meant to arrive. The Miller-Watson Retreat Center officially opened its doors the following day, welcoming its inaugural cohort of Vietnam veterans grappling with the debilitating psychological wounds that would later be formally recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. In the ensuing years, its programs expanded significantly, encompassing services for at-risk youth, women seeking refuge from domestic violence, families navigating crisis. Richard and I continued our carefully rebuilt relationship, initially as close friends and professional partners, eventually, gradually, blossoming into something deeper, more intimate. Not a passionate rekindling of youthful infatuation, but the steady, quiet flame of mature love, nurtured between two individuals who had confronted life's harshest realities and consciously chosen to create something beautiful, something enduring, together. Sarah graduated with honors, pursued her passion for teaching, and eventually bestowed upon me the immeasurable joy of grandchildren. Three remarkable young souls who grew up understanding the complex, nuanced story of their grandmother's abandoned wedding and the redemptive retreat center that ultimately rose from its ashes. Now at 82, reflecting upon the intricate tapestry of a life characterized by so many unforeseen twists and turns, I can state with quiet certainty what I frequently share with the young people seeking guidance at the center. It is not the absence of pain that defines a fulfilling life, but rather what constructive meaning, what positive action you manage to build from that pain. It is not the wrongs inflicted upon you that ultimately shape your destiny, but how you consciously choose to transform those experiences. It is not the hearts that inevitably break along the way, but the remarkable capacity of those hearts to mend, often growing larger, stronger, more compassionate,